Hi everyone, in this video we'll be going over Chapter 11 Personality, and we'll be talking about the psychodynamic perspectives, the neo-Freudian perspectives, and other multiple approaches to personality. So before we begin, what do you think personality is? Go ahead and write down some thoughts or think about some possible answers of what you think personality is before we dive into this. So personality is a combination of characteristics, traits, and patterns of behavior that form an individual's character to consistently think, feel, and behave in certain ways. And the key word here is consistent. So are these characteristics, traits, and patterns of behavior consistent over time? Or do they just happen once in a while? If they happen consistent over time, then we're more likely to have that personality. And the Greeks believed that a person's personality fit into one of these four temperaments. So there were choleric, sanguine, phlegmatic, or melancholic. And these are the four different temperaments that the ancient Greeks proposed psychology or personality was. So choleric, they were more excitable, egocentric, impulsive, and active. Sanguine personalities were more playful, easygoing, carefree, hopeful. Phlegmatic were more reasonable, controlled, persistent, and calm. And then melancholic were more anxious, worried, or thoughtful people. And then later, the Germans believed that personality could be found from the distances between the bumps on the skull, and this was called phrenology. And by measuring these distances, it was thought to reveal the sizes of the different brain areas underneath the skull, providing information that could be used to determine whether a person was friendly, prideful, maybe murderous, or kind. And back then, phrenology was very popular until it was discredited for the lack of empirical support. And after this, many other thought processes for personality emerged, one of which came from our good old friend Freud, who developed his psychodynamic perspective of personality. Freud believed that we had levels of consciousness: the conscious, or the mental activity we are aware of, and then the unconscious, which was the mental activity that we are not aware of and unable to access. He compared our mind to an iceberg, as you see here, in which the conscious was above the water, but most of our thinking was in our unconscious, or inside of the water. According to Freud, our personality develops from a conflict between two opposing forces: our biological aggressive and pleasure-seeking drives versus our internal control over these drives. And thus he thought out personality as a result of our efforts to balance these two competing forces. And Freud suggested that we could understand this conflict by imagining three interacting systems within our minds, which he called the id, ego, and the superego. The id remains unconscious, as you could see that the id is in the unconscious in the iceberg demonstration. And the id controls impulses for hunger, thirst, and sex. And Freud believed that the id operates on what he called the pleasure principle, in which the id seeks immediate gratification at all times. The other part is the superego, which develops as a child interacts with others, learning from social rules of right and wrong. And the superego acts as our conscious or moral compass that directs us to behave in a normal way. And the superego strives for perfection and judges our behavior, leading to feelings of pride or guilt. And then the last part is our ego, which is the rational part of our personality. And the ego is thought to be our true self and is part of our personality that's seen, or portrayed by others. And the ego's job is to balance the conflicting demands between the id and the superego. So the ego helps the id satisfy its desires in a realistic way, while also adhering to the superego's needs to do things right. And Freud also theorized that when the ego is unable to mediate the id or superego, defense mechanisms develop, which are protective barriers to reduce that conflict. And here are some of his defense mechanisms that he theorized here. So there's denial, refusing to accept real events because they're unpleasant. And then in the yellow, it shows different examples. There's displacement, transferring inappropriate urges or behaviors into a more acceptable or less threatening target. And these are some of the defense mechanisms that Freud theorized. And then further, Freud believed that personality begins in early childhood, and that childhood experiences 4 developments in stages to form our personality. In each of these psychosexual stages of development, a child's pleasure-seeking urges from the id are focused on a different area of the body called the erogenous zone. And these stages are called the oral, the anal, the phallic, the latency, and the genital stage. The first stage in the oral stage is from birth to year 1, and the erogenous zone is the mouth, and pleasure is focused on the mouth, so eating and the pleasure derived from sucking bottles or pacifiers or thumbs plays a large part in the baby's first year of life. And according to Freud, an adult who smokes or drinks, overeats, or bites their nails are often fixated in the oral stage. And then after the oral stage, children enter the anal stage, which is between 1 and 3 years old. And in this stage, children experience pleasure in their bowel and bladder movements. So the conflict is the stage is over toilet training mostly. And parents who are harsh in toilet training can cause a child to become more fixated in the anal stage, leading to an anal retentive personality, which is often stingy and stubborn. Or if parents are too lenient in toilet training, a child might become fixated and display a more messy personality. And then after the anal stage is the phallic stage, which is between 3 and 6 years old, when children become aware of their bodies and recognize the differences between a boy and a girl. And now this stage is highly refuted, and there is no evidence to back this up, but conflict arises when a child feels a desire for the opposite sex parent, and jealousy and hatred toward that same sex parent. So for boys, this is called the Oedipus complex, in which a boy's desire for his mother and his urge to replace his father, who's seen as a rival for his mother's attention. And then for girls, they experience an Electra complex, in which a girl desires the attention of her father and wishes to take her mother's place. Also, they develop penis envy because they're angry at their mother for not providing them with a penis. Again, this is not empirically supported, and these are just Freud's ideas, so don't take them to heart. And following the phallic stage is the latency period between 6 years to puberty, and in this period feelings are dormant as children focus on other pursuits such as school, friends, hobbies, or sports. And in this stage or period, children generally engage in activities with peers of the same sex, which helps consolidate a child's gender role. Then the final stage is the genital stage from puberty to later on in life. And in this stage, there is a sexual awakening as a person redirects these urges to other, more socially acceptable partners, which aren't their parents, as Freud loved to point out. And individuals who successfully completed their previous stages and end up reaching the genital stage with no fixations are said to be well-balanced and healthy adults. but all others who didn't have a certain hyperfixation from one of the other stages are trapped in those stages if they don't complete those stages. And as you could tell, most of Freud's work is outlandish, and that's because it is. There hasn't really been science or evidence to back up his theories, so just keep that in mind as you're learning about Freud.